Welcome to the Financial Integrity Hub's podcast. The Financial Integrity Hub pioneers research and explores how law and governance strategies can be designed, implemented and enforced to support anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Identity, a RegTech providing financial institutions assurance that they are meeting AUSTRAC reporting obligations. The platform allows regulated entities to gain visibility over transactions, improve auditability, automate manual processes, and reduce the risk of non-compliance. Your host is Isabel Nicholas. Isabel is a researcher at the Financial Integrity Hub. She teaches financial crime at Macquarie Law School and interviews global and domestic experts on trends and market insights for the podcast.
Welcome back to the Financial Integrity Hub's podcast, where we explore the world of money laundering and financial crime. Today, we're joined by an industry recruitment expert, Sophie Watson, who will share her valuable insights for both employers and those looking to enter or rejoin the financial crime, risk, and compliance field. Sophie's expertise goes beyond recruitment and employment strategies. She also possesses a deep understanding of the trends and developments in the industry, as well as the skills and qualifications in high demand. Join us for a juicy episode to talk about skills and salaries. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in. You can find our previous episodes by searching the Financial Integrity Hub at Macquarie Law School on LinkedIn or on Macquarie University's website. After graduating in law at the University of Leeds, Sophie opted for what she felt would be a more exciting career in recruitment. Sophie places junior, mid and senior level candidates in compliance and financial roles. Sophie joined Tom Executive's Audit, Risk and Compliance Desk in 2018 after 3.5 years working in professional services recruitment in Sydney and her native London. She has a passion for building relationships with top talent, understanding the needs of clients and continuously growing her knowledge of the compliance market. Sophie is well recognised as one of Sydney's leading specialists in financial crime recruitment for roles in risk, compliance, legal, banking and finance. In the last 12 months, Sophie assisted Bank of Queensland, Macquarie, Sportsbet and Tabcorp for different roles such as Head of Financial Crime and Senior Partner. The Financial Integrity Hub is currently developing an online certification course with various modules designed specifically to the Australian market. As part of our exploration into the certification's significance, we have invited industry expert Sophie to join us and discuss employability and careers in financial crime. Welcome to the podcast, Sophie.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's get right from the beginning. Can you describe what the process of recruiting for a financial crime position entails? So when a client approaches you and says they're looking for staff, do you have a list of potential candidates and do you interview the candidate before putting them forward to the client?
Yes. So when a client comes to me to assist them in recruitment, it's usually because of a couple of reasons. The first one is that the role is confidential. The second can be that there's a huge time pressure. And the third, and probably most likely, is that they feel as though they've exhausted their own network and talent pool, and they just want to ensure that they're getting the best in the market. Having worked in the Sydney market across financial crime for coming up to 6 years now, I'd like to think that I have a very strong network. And if I don't know people, I'm usually 1 degree of separation away. So there will always be an initial list of candidates I can turn to after hearing about a role. And it's all going to be dependent on what that role looks like, what the challenges are, what the expectation is. Obviously, then that depends on what candidate they're looking for. In terms of interviewing candidates, I'd like to think that I've met a lot of people in the market over the last 6 years. And as I said, I always am 1 degree of separation. So then it's just a case of getting a referral to that candidate through someone that they know and I know as well.
What do you consider to be those top trends in anti-money laundering or financial crime recruitment?
So we've seen a huge demand in the last couple of years, obviously set off from the Royal Commission. And then since then, it's really been AUSTRAC that are focusing on, first it was the banks. We've obviously had a lot of issues with the casinos recently. And I think that's just going to continue. I mean, in terms of trends, it is the advisory work that seems to be in most demand. And that's just having a really clear understanding as to how to operationalize financial crime compliance. I think what we're now seeing is as the banks and the casinos and the bigger organizations have uplifted their teams, It is the smaller institutions that still need to go through that process, but it's getting a little bit more technical. I've seen a big shift in demand for financial crime analytics, for example, and that's looking at how, from a transaction monitoring standpoint, the rule optimization around that. And that's probably, I guess, a skill set that we haven't really developed yet in Australia.
That's really interesting. I guess in light of that, as Australia's kind of regulatory environment becomes more complex, do you find that businesses are investing in their financial crime compliance teams?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I think if you look at the spend from the banks and now the casinos and other organisations as well, they're really weighing up the cost of non-compliance. We've seen what the big fines can look like, and I don't think any organisation wants to go through that. And they also don't want the reputational damage. So there has been an uplift across financial crime compliance, which is great. And I think that is only going to continue. We've got tranche 2, hopefully, coming into play at some point. And that is going to, again, significantly uplift demand, as there are industries that are going to have to work out what they need to do from an AML perspective and start building out those AML programs. So yes, I would say there's been a huge investment across financial crime over the last couple of years.
And how do you assess a candidate's adaptability in terms of their ability to stay ahead of these regulatory changes that we're seeing in Australia?
I think one of the reasons I actually enjoy recruiting in this space so much, and I have said it before, but it is just how passionate people are. And I think that comes across straight away. Like in the interview process, I will meet people for a coffee, we'll have a conversation about the market, and you can tell when someone is really engaged in what they do. And I think if you're engaged in what you do, you are automatically going to keep up to date with the regulatory trends that are coming through, because not only is that part of your job, but it's something that you find interesting. And so I think you usually can say, you can usually see it straight away. In terms of whether someone's right for a role or not, that does come down to experience. So you've got to have the passion, and you've got to have the engagement, and you've got to be able to actually educate the business on financial crime, it's actually a really important aspect of any role in this space. But at the same time, you've got to have the right experience. And I think as we become a more mature environment, that right experience is something that is going to be the number one priority when assessing someone for a role.
That's great. And what are your tips for professional candidates that are wanting to enter or even re-enter the risk and compliance industry? So do you find that there's a particular academic background that's preferable for financial crime or compliance roles? I mentioned earlier the Financial Integrity Hub's developing its own online modules on the fundamentals of anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing, and it's got specific electives in AML, CTF in the bars and clubs, or the gambling industry and beneficial ownership. So do you think these types of courses could improve a candidate's chances?
Yeah, I think really at the moment we've only got a couple of options. And if I'm honest, they are very American in terms of the examples that they use, even in the training modules. So I think it's great that the Integrity Hub is building out these new modules that are probably going to be more specific to the Australian market and the Australian regulation. I think in terms of who should be looking at these modules and who would get the most out of them, it's honestly anyone across financial crime. It doesn't matter how many years experience you have. Another thing that I have noticed is those that are at the top of their game are at the top of their game because they're the most curious about this subject, and they never want to stop learning. And they will actively seek out new ways in which they can learn and see different perspectives. So I think any sort of educational piece that we can be developing is going to be great for the industry.
I was just going to say, I guess it's interesting in a space that's kind of constantly changing and evolving, and in a regulatory kind of environment that is so hostile at the moment, to staying up to date with those things, I can imagine is so important for candidates going into these roles to really be aware of what the environment actually looks like in today's world and in tomorrow's world, as opposed to, what it was a few years ago.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've thought about it a number of times myself. What's the word? It's definitely an advantage. So I think the more training that they can do in the space, the better. But you can't let that deter away from the actual experience that you gain in a role. And the question you asked before about sort of initial education background and if there's a particular degree, the ones that always stand out are, number one is law. just because, especially from an advisory standpoint, you're able to really interpret regulation and legislation. Economics is a good one just because you then have a sort of greater understanding in terms of what the economy looks like and what the environment is. And realistically, that's always going to have some sort of trend and connection to what's going on across financial crime.
I know that teaching at Macquarie University and also other universities around Sydney at the moment are starting to develop more financial crime courses within the university, within the law degrees, which is very new to these courses. They never really had or taught financial crime before when I was a student there, which wasn't very long ago, and they didn't have courses on financial crime. So it is kind of a developing space in terms of what academics you can have. So it's interesting to hear your view on that.
What's funny is I did the same. So I actually studied law myself, and there was no financial crime modules. It was the closest you could get was a banking and finance module, which sort of spoke about financial crime to a certain extent and more sort of broader risk and compliance. But it would have been great to have had a financial crime module in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And could you share your market insights on what salaries look like in this space? The juicy question. I'm sure a lot of people are curious.
It's a very juicy question. And I'd say it's changed a lot. If I look back, even 18 months ago, when the main focus was still probably on the banks, the salaries increased dramatically, and it really shifted the market. I'm talking they went up sort of 20-30%, which is huge. Now that the bigger banks have uplifted their AML policies and frameworks, it has shifted to the casinos and the gambling industry, and also, as I said, the smaller institutions that are really just trying to lift their game with this. But what that has meant is these organizations don't necessarily have as much money to play with as the big banks do. And what they're advertising now is not that people would take a drop in salary, but there's less of a chance you'd actually get an uplift from your current salary at the moment. And I think, in all honesty, in the last couple of years, candidates have said to me themselves that their mindset's probably shifted from a salary standpoint. And yes, the money is great, and there's always going to be, money's always going to matter. But at the same point, they're now looking for the responsibility level. They're looking for the team. They're wanting culture. They're wanting, potentially hybrid working is a priority for a lot of people out there now. And so it has shifted away from it being so money driven. I would still say, so if you are starting out in financial crime, the consultancies are always a great place to start because you do learn a lot, and you're learning from partners that have a wealth of experience across this space. You're learning from different clients, getting different perspectives, and really sort of getting a good grounding. But from a salary standpoint, that it's not going to be great. So with that, you can expect anything from sort of 70 to 100K. Once you've got a couple of years experience behind you, it then ticks over that 100K mark. When you've got between 3 and 5 years, and you can start looking at getting manager opportunities in organizations, then you can see the salaries shift from anything between sort of 110 all the way up to 140, 150. When you have about 5 years experience, that's when the 150K mark comes possible. It's still very high. And so again, it is dependent on what experience you've had in those 5 years. And, whether you've had mentorship, whether you've had leadership, what exposure you've had to senior stakeholders, and also how well you can get that across to clients in an interview process. So senior manager levels tend to go between, I'd say, about 140 to 180K plus super. And you'd expect to have between, I'd say, about 5 to 8-9 years experience to be getting that. And then you start ticking over the 200K after you've had about 9 years experience. Realistically, salaries now, so ahead of financial crime compliance, you could be going anything between 250 to 300. When you've then got the MRLO, so that liability and that additional responsibility, it does tick over the 300K mark. And then, if I look at the biggest salaries on the market, that can go anywhere up to sort of 500. So one thing to bear in mind is that financial crime can certainly give you very good prospects from a salary standpoint, but it's also important to note that, salary really isn't everything. There are going to be other opportunities that come to people where it is enticing, but you've just got to come back and think, what are your values? What do you enjoy doing? What's the team going to be like? What's the career trajectory that you have? And is it an organization that's going to support you for the next 5-10 years? I'd be more than happy for anyone to reach out to me to have a discussion about salary. Of course, confidential doesn't necessarily need to go anywhere else, but just so people can gauge where they are in the market. I'll always be honest if someone is pitching too high and what that could mean in terms of outpricing themselves in the market. And I'll always be honest if someone is underpaid and what they should be expecting if they have a conversation with their current employer, or if that means looking elsewhere.
That's great. Thank you, Sophie. And I love that you pointed out the importance of, thinking beyond salary and into thinking about your values and how compatible they are with your potential employer. And on that note, what is your advice to businesses or companies looking to hire talent in this space?
Lots. Always come to an agency? No, I can't say that. I would say you've really got to put your best foot forward. There was a point where, and there still is, I would say that, there aren't enough great professionals to match the amount of roles that we have in Australia. And if Tranche 2 comes into play as well, that is going to mean there's even more opportunity. And it's not as though we've got an influx of candidates coming from anywhere soon. So I think when you are looking to recruit, you've got to really understand yourself in terms of what the sell is for someone to come and join the team. And you've got to believe it. So you've got to have clear responsibilities set out for them, just so that they know what to expect. You've got to make sure that you're introducing them to the right people in the business. Who are their peers? Who are they going to be working with? Are there any key stakeholders that they should be meeting along the way? You've got to make sure the remuneration is right. We've sort of said, you've got to balance remuneration with other aspects of a role, but you can't underpay someone for the job that they're going to be doing. I would also say to always keep an eye out for who is on the market. I think one of the best clients I have are those that if I know someone's coming onto the market and they are an absolute superstar, they want to know about them. And I think that makes a huge difference. It means that, yes, okay, there's certain budgets that an organisation has to work to, but you're also open to just seeing if there is an absolute superstar, you want to be speaking to them and you want to see if there's an opportunity in your team that you can create for them, just because you know what impacts they could potentially have. And I think that's huge, just having the flexibility around that. What other advice could I give? I joke, but I do think if you are partnered with an agency, it helps. I'm not saying it has to be Tom Executive. I'm not saying it has to be myself, but I think getting the real-time advice from people that are recruiting all of the time can help. Even if it's just a further insight into salaries and what you should be offering for the role, or whether there are candidates on the market that are going to fit the job that you're looking for. And it is to just make sure that you are bringing in the best people in the market and not just those that are searching for a new role at that particular time. I think it is really important.
Absolutely, Sophie. Thank you so much for those really valuable and practical insights into this space. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today.
You too. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed myself.
The Financial Integrity Hub's research equips Australia and the international community with the knowledge, tools and insights to understand, identify and disrupt illicit finance threats. If you're interested in seeing more from the Financial Integrity Hub, don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn to see our posts and events. We post a few times each week on breaking news and the latest research. We would like to thank Dr. Doran Goldbarsht for his academic advice and Isabel Nicholas for hosting.